Well, in this passage, Jesus was addressing the people of Israel, a people who were burdened and weighed down with all the legal do's and don'ts, rules and restrictions of the Pharisees. And with this came the consequences for how they felt, sense of guilt, frustration and dissatisfaction with the society in which they were living. Does this sound at all familiar to you? It could sound like the way in which we've been living recently under the coronavirus lockdown restrictions. Many people I've spoken to in recent weeks and months have spoken about feeling restrained or restricted, even using the word oppressed, by the many various and constantly changing regulations that we've had during this lockdown period. Jesus was warning the people of the oppressive and legalistic ways of the Pharisees. He said, "And they tie up heavy loads and lay them on men's shoulders." He was speaking about the way that they'd hidden the true meaning of the Old Testament law, which was good, but it was hidden in all the religious rules and regulations that these religious people had instituted as being the way to God, the true spirituality, the way to receive God's blessing in life. They'd codified the Mosaic law into 365 prohibitions, that's one per day, and 250 different commandments. They had taken something that was in essence very good and bound it up in oppressive rules and regulations. That might seem to echo some of the tension that we might feel about the spirit of the regulations to protect people from COVID-19. The regulations that are there to keep us all well and safe, and all the rules that have been put in place to try and achieve this that can actually end up feeling quite oppressive and restrictive. There's been a lack of clarity in some of the regulations and some clear contradictions in the instructions that we've received. Some of the decisions seem to have been made with little or insufficient consultation with the affected institutions. Within the church, that has certainly been the case that I have felt. We were given little notice of our churches being allowed to open for private prayer. It was too little notice to allow us to clean the churches and prepare them sufficiently to be able to open and operate in a safe way for people to come in and pray. Likewise, we've recently been told that public worship, weddings and funerals can now take place in church, but the details, the guidelines, the regulations as to exactly how we do that are still awaited. We've received some of the information, but not all the detail. And I know that for me and for a great number of my clergy colleagues, this has felt like a huge weight on our shoulders. What is good, opening up the churches, protecting people, can feel like a heavy load. In our reading, even though the Old Testament law was good, holy and righteous, it didn't bring liberty to the people of Israel. It was a weak system, and one of its greatest weaknesses was that it actually depended on man to fulfill that law, often depending on man to do something that was beyond his ability to do so. It gave unrealistic demands. It set unrealistic demands on people. The law didn't actually provide the means with which to fulfill and abide by the law. And therefore it left people under a feeling of oppression, a feeling of guilt, a feeling of failure. Rather than the freedom that a relationship with God should bring, it brought feelings of oppression. I wonder again if we might see some parallels with our current situations. The spirit of the regulations to protect us all from COVID-19 is good. The regulations are well intentioned. The weakness in the system is the people who ignore or will not abide by the guidance. And therefore, these people will suffer further from the oppression of this virus. I'm sure those in Leicester at the moment are feeling once again very much restricted and oppressed by the fact that they are now having to go back into, or not to be able to come out of, lockdown. Those who were under the Mosaic law were said to be yoked to Moses. Those who were under the authority of the Pharisees were said to be yoked to the Pharisees. And it's in the midst of this religious setting that the Lord makes a very gracious, generous invitation to all who would want to experience the relief and the joy that comes from a relationship with him and the blessings of his life. This is an invitation that's aimed at all, at the curious and the convinced, those who already have a faith and those who don't, to bring those who are already committed into a deeper relationship with him, and to bring those who don't already have a relationship with him into one. This is at the very heart of Jesus' ministry. His appeal for people to come to him as a relief for their oppression, as a freedom from whatever it is they have been yoked to, is at the heart of Jesus' offer. It is a call to turn away from whatever you're presently depending on, to turn to Christ and to depend on him. For those who are already believers, it is a call to follow him as a committed disciple. It's a call to completely turn our lives over to him. And this drives home one of the great concepts of Christianity that must be taught and grasped. And that is that Christianity is about a relationship with the person of Jesus Christ. It's not a call to a program or a system of religion, nor to a particular church, and certainly not to follow a human leader, a discipler, a minister. Too often, the disciple makers end up cloning subordinates rather than developing Christ-like people. We're called to all of us individually become the people that God wants us to be, not to copy someone else. Many church leaders and other leaders say, agree with me, think like me, dress like me, teach like I do, act like me, and you will be successful. You will have a good ministry or job or whatever it is that they are expounding. While God does indeed use churches, people and theological systems, ultimately Christianity is about an intimate personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So what does it mean to take Christ's yoke, to use the language of our gospel reading today? Well, to take his yoke means to submit to his person as the person who is gentle, who is meek, the one who is caring and concerned for us. It means to put yourself under his leading, to join yourself together with him. But the difference is, this weight doesn't sit heavy on us. Jesus tells us it is light. And the reason is, Jesus is our yoke mate. Now, this is really strange language. And I have to say, the first time I heard it, I thought, what's all this about? I didn't understand about oxes and ploughing and pulling carts and yokes and all these sort of things. Until somebody who knew a bit more about this than I did explained the context of this writing. And that is that when they used to train an ox to pull a cart or a plough, a new ox was put with an older, more experienced ox. And this could look a bit odd because you'd have this small, inexperienced, relatively weak ox alongside a much bigger, stronger, older, more experienced ox. But what happened was the stronger, older ox took most of the strain, and so the younger one learned how to pull without all that weight, without all that strain. The younger ox learned how to respond to the commands of the driver without having the distraction of all the strain of the weight. And this carried on until the young ox learned how to take that strain and listen to the commands at the same time. In other words, the stronger ox supported the weaker ox until it was able to take the strain itself. Now, I think that's a fantastic example of how Jesus can shoulder some of our load, can take some of our weight off us if we just hand it over to him, until we learn to take on that responsibility, that weight for ourselves. Now, that may be about whatever it is that we're experiencing in life. Jesus is always ready to take our burdens on him and to make our life easier for us in that respect. It doesn't take away the problems, But what it does is it takes the heaviness away from us. But we have to trust in him, and we have to be prepared to hand over to him in whatever way that may be. When Jesus calls us to serve him, he calls us to serve him in his power, and he offers to take the heaviness of that demand upon him. And the only time that this load can then become overbearing is when we try to take over and do the pulling for ourselves, to handle the load ourselves. In other words, when we try to do things in our own power, we bear all the weight of that. When we hand over to Jesus and try to do things in his strength and in his power, he takes that weight and our load becomes lighter. Amen.